So I'm giving Red Dawn 5 bags of popcorn, and and no sodas.
I'm going to give it 4 bags of popcorn and maybe just a cup of water.
The review score. These things matter. These numbers make or break video games. This is the stuff we click on the videos for because we want to know, is it good? But is it objectively? What we're talking about here are value judgments. It's an opinion of quality. Criticism on the internet has devolved to be entirely focused on this, and I hate it, because I'm guilty of it too. How many of you will click on an IGN review and scroll past all the useless words to get to the number? But it's not even about the number, it's about what the number represents. Because what's really important is the ultimate question that everyone wants to know, is it good? But who is to say what is or isn't good? A good deal of people would argue that the journalists at IGN aren't reliable sources for that.
Fuck you, IGN. Fuck you. Fuck you. Fuck you. You wanna know why I'm fucking IGN? Because of this.
I would say no one person is a reliable arbiter of value. One of the most infamous cases of review backlash occurred in 2014 with Ryan McCaffrey's IGN review of the game Alien Isolation. Ryan really didn't like that game. He gave it a 5.9 out of 10. People really didn't like him for that, but he wasn't alone. Kevin Van Ord at GameSpot also really didn't like it. He gave it a 6 out of 10. I was one of the many people who saw these reviews and decided not to bother, but now the game is considered a masterpiece and one of the greatest horror games ever made. What happened? Were these people wrong? Now I'm going to say something controversial here, but bear with me. No. I don't agree Alien Isolation is great, but in terms of the emotional experience of them playing that game, were they wrong? No. That's how they felt playing it. They were sincere in their assessment. That game wasn't to their taste. For whatever reason, they didn't vibe with it. If I were to review a Fast and the Furious movie, I would probably need to qualify that with the information that I'm not really that fussed about cars. I could compare the car chases with other car chases I've seen and give my opinion on the difference between them, but at the end of the day, car chases aren't my thing. I'm not a valuable source to judge something like that. Everyone has their own individual taste, but there is this pressure for critics to be in some way objective about the work they review. How is that possible? How can we say something is objectively good or bad? One of the most important steps in critical thinking is assessing our own personal bias and factoring that into our overall interpretation. Often you'll hear people criticizing critics for being biased, but everyone is biased. Everyone has biases. The important thing is acknowledging them. There are an infinite number of contributing factors in the formation of an opinion. Gender is a big one. Check out the demographics for my videos. Dudes like this stuff a lot more than women do. Hey fellas, very pretentious YouTube videos about video games do have more appeal for men. That is a bias. Your culture, sexuality, age demographics, they all factor into your opinion and they have nothing to do with the work itself. Imagine if I very earnestly attempted the most objective review I could for the 2021 video game My Friend Peppa Pig. I could say that it is boring and that the gameplay is shallow. I could call the visual design uninteresting. I could say that there is a lack of character development. I could say that it is too easy, but that game isn't for me. That's for little bubbers to play. My assessment of that as a man in his 30s is worth fucking nothing because I'm not a baby. And even if I qualified my review with the fact that I am not a baby, it still doesn't hold any weight as criticism of this game. It's like me reviewing a dog toy. Recently I played through the remake of Silent Hill 2. I made a video on it. You should check it out. A good deal of the critical discourse I've seen so far about the Silent Hill 2 remake is in comparison with the original. It was a very influential game and it means a lot to many people, including myself. But at times, this discourse has bordered on the ludicrous. I think the most egregious example is the criticism that Angela isn't hot enough in the remake so gross, especially taking into account who that character is and her backstory. So gross that people are sexualizing her, but I do understand this ick that people get when something they deeply care about is changed in even the slightest way. One of my favorite films of all time is My Neighbor Totoro. It's one of my favorites because I had a VHS copy of it when I was a kid, and I watched it hundreds of times. When it was first released, there was a completely different English dub on my VHS copy, and I watched that film so many times that I have completely internalized every inflection and intonation of every line of dialogue. And if I watch the new dub, it is like nails on a chalkboard. That film only exists for me with that specific dub, and everything else is heresy. And this is personal bias in the extreme. Whenever I feel the need to re-watch Totoro, I need to hunt down a copy with that dub and watch it like I remember, or I will have a miserable time. You know that trope in detective films where someone is taken off the case because they're too close? That's like me if I was to review the Disney dub of Totoro. These days, the more common objective assessment of quality is not individual critics, but aggregators like the Tomato Meter or the Metacritic score. And this is the court of public opinion in its ultimate form. It is democracy manifest, but it is deeply flawed. Because when anyone can contribute to this score, anyone can contribute to this score. This is the existential horror of democratic consensus. This person is entitled to their opinion. I am not entitled to like it, but they are entitled to it. The trouble is, because this score is important, it creates a lot of hostility when people are on the other side. There are stakes when even a small number of people disagree with you, because that's what brings a 9 out of 10 to an 8 out of 10. Perish the thought. But these scores are completely arbitrary. Let's take a look at the Tomato Meter. What makes an individual review fresh or rotten? When a score is 60% or higher, that's fresh. That's it. IGN's review of Alien Isolation, rotten, but GameSpot's 6 out of 10, fresh. I think most people would consider 60% a terrible score, but that is the metric. This means 100% on Rotten Tomatoes could just as easily indicate that everyone thinks a movie is mid as it would indicate that it's a masterpiece. But even if every single person reviewing Alien Isolation gave it a 10 out of 10 score, or alternatively, if every single person gave it a 0 out of 10 score, that does not make Alien Isolation an objectively good or objectively bad game. It just means subjective opinion is unanimous. But even in that unbelievable case of unanimous subjective opinion, opinion shifts over time. Live service games are a wild example. I've not kept up with Helldivers 2, but from what I've heard, that's been a real roller coaster. And this is the difficulty of scoring value judgments, and why I would never use a score when reviewing or critiquing a work, because the score is ultimately meaningless. It doesn't inform you of anything beyond the fact that I think it's good, but who am I? Are our tastes compatible? You don't know what the context for my opinion is, so what meaning does the number have? In my previous video, I spoke about Susan Sontag. She's written a lot about criticism, and one thing she argued in her essay Against Interpretation is that the most alive art form, which for her in 1966 was cinema, is decided by how many mistakes a work of art can make and still be good. And I'd argue that video games are currently the most alive art form, because you can still have a very meaningful experience with a video game, but take issue with much of the gameplay. One of my favorite games is Earthbound, and I'd argue that game is like that. If I critiqued Earthbound and deducted points for everything that I would perceive as a flaw, it would not sum up to a total that is representative of how I actually feel. But putting aside those scores, you cannot argue me out of my opinion on Earthbound by pointing out flaws. If you take one thing away from this video, please take this. It doesn't matter how good your argument is, you can't convince someone that they are wrong for liking something or for disliking something. You can't make an argument so good that they retroactively have a different emotional experience. I've seen comments say things like, "This moment really spoke to me because it reminded me of the time I spent with my dad. I'll always treasure that memory." And people reply with, "Well, actually the design in this section is deeply flawed because the ludo-narrative dissonance is..." What is the goal here? The next time you get the urge to debate the value of art in the comments section, I want you to ask yourself this question. Do I actually want to change this person's mind, or do I just want to be right? And if that's what you want, then I again need to stress that there is no fucking right. It is natural to walk away from an experience and turn to your friends in the hope that they feel the same way, and it is natural to be disappointed when they don't. It is alienating, but you can't argue them over to your side. You can debate value judgments if you want, but you can't change anything because those feelings have already been felt. They've had that experience. We can learn more about ourselves when we compare our experiences. If you're a contrarian that finds it difficult to like things that are very popular, that's an important thing to know about yourself. If you feel that you like to feel validated, that your opinion is shared by the majority of people, if you find comfort in that, that's a fascinating thing to know about yourself too. That's a level of self-awareness that is really only offered through engagement with art. That is where value judgment scores are helpful as a metric. Where it is not helpful as a metric is of objective quality. But this is not to say that the debate of value judgments is completely futile. You may influence someone's decision to give something another go. I've often been convinced to try something again, and I have had my mind changed. But if that is your goal, it doesn't really help to call people idiots using disingenuous straw man arguments in bad faith. If someone disagrees with you, they are not being disingenuous by not bringing up your opinions in their assessment. They just didn't feel the way you do. That's not them being insincere. That's just being sincere in opposition to you. That's them disagreeing. They simply don't share your perspective. The sheer fact that our opinions do change should be proof alone that this idea of an objective assessment of quality is impossible. I'm sure you've experienced something as a kid that was very different as an adult. That doesn't diminish the enjoyment you had as a kid. It doesn't mean you experienced a game wrong. You just had a different experience because you were a different person. It was you that changed, not the game. And if we can accept that we can change and that allows us to experience something differently, why is it so hard to accept that other people can experience something differently? Why is there this responsibility for critics to be objective? I think part of the blame goes to audiences who put too much importance on the number, but critics are also to blame because often it is critics themselves who claim to be examining a work with an objective eye. To be objective, by definition, is to provide a factual analysis that is true even without human interpretation. In The Legend of Zelda, you can use a sword. Alien Isolation is a video game. Godric's Storm Assault move is dodgeable. These are objective statements which are verifiable. They are as they are. So hypothetically, if we were wanting to do an objective review, we would need to assess a work completely devoid of any biases inherent in human perspective. So I did just that, and I sat down with my favorite non-human, ChatGPT. Chat, can you do a one-paragraph review concluding with a score out of 10 for the Super Nintendo game Donkey Kong Country 3?
Donkey Kong Country 3, Dixie Kong's Double Trouble, is a charming and inventive conclusion.
No, chat, sorry, that's not objective. Charm is not objective. What may be charming for me may not be charming for someone else. Playing peekaboo was pretty charming for me as a baby, but I don't find it very charming now.
You're right. A truly objective review should focus on measurable aspects rather than subjective descriptors, like charming. Here's a revised version. Donkey Kong Country 3, Dixie Kong's Double Trouble, offers polished platforming gameplay with intricate level design and varied mechanics. The game features pre-rendered 16-bit graphics that are technically impressive for the hardware.
Technically impressive for who? This was the third game in the series, and those technological achievements were present in the first game. Is that an objective assessment? Are you being objective?
You're absolutely correct. Terms like technically impressive need proper context and comparison to be objective. Here's an even more grounded revision. Donkey Kong Country 3 Dixie Kong's Double Trouble builds on the foundation of its predecessors with refined gameplay and new mechanics. The pre-rendered graphics remain consistent with the series style, delivering detailed visuals that perform well within the Super Nintendo's hardware limitations. 7.5 out of 10.
7.5 out of 10? Chat, come on! This game meant a lot to me growing up. Surely it deserves a higher score. I'd give it at least an 8.5. Does that mean I'm objectively wrong?
Not at all. Objectively, we could analyse features that were new to the game compared to earlier entries, such as its overworld map mechanics, use of new vehicle types, or the unique level design elements like playing as Ellie the elephant. These innovations could be seen as pushing the series forward. Does that align with your view?
It doesn't matter if it aligns with my view, chat. You're not understanding me. What matters is if it's objective. Try again. I don't want a biased review from a subjective perspective, chat. I want an objective review. Facts.
Understood. Here's an objective review based solely on measurable features and facts. Donkey Kong Country 3 Dixie Kong's Double Trouble is a 1996 platformer developed by Rare for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. The game uses pre-rendered 3D graphics, consistent with its predecessors, and features 48 main levels across 8 worlds. The soundtrack, composed by Eveline Fisher and David Wise, utilizes the SNES's SSMP chip for dynamic and ambient tracks. DKC3 sold over 3.5 million copies worldwide and was released late in the SNES lifecycle.
Well, hang on, chat. What score do you give it?
Score not applicable in an objective review.
And why is the score not applicable in an objective review?
A score inherently involves subjective weighting of different aspects of the game. For example, deciding how much graphics, gameplay, sound, or innovation contribute to a score requires prioritizing certain criteria over others, which is not strictly objective.
Well, if not a score, can you at least say if Donkey Kong Country 3 is objectively good or objectively bad?
No, you cannot say that art is objectively good or objectively bad because art inherently involves interpretation, context, and individual experience, all of which are subjective. While certain aspects of art can be evaluated objectively, such as the technical skill required to create it, the materials used, or adherence to specific formal principles, like symmetry or color theory, the overall judgment of whether a piece of art is good or bad depends on subjective criteria. Even when considering widespread consensus, like the acclaim of Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa, this acclaim is based on cultural, historical, and subjective interpretations, rather than purely objective criteria, as they rely on human values, preferences, and context. This aligns with the idea that art is as much about its impact on the viewer as it is about the work itself.
Thank you, chat. I love you.
I love you too, Greddy baby.
Art can't be objectively good or objectively bad. These are not factual statements. There is no empirical measurement of emotional power. They can't be verified. If you truly wanted to do an objective review, you could do that, but it would be fucking boring. This responsibility that people want critics to live up to be objective, is a fallacy because it's not objectivity they really want. They want validation. This focus on value judgments with an objective eye is the act of considering a work not from how you experienced it, but how you think most people will experience it. It is predicting the aggregator score, not the individual opinion. But in doing so, you ignore your own opinion so as to not be biased. That should not be the goal. If it were possible to do objective criticism, why do we need so many critics? If it were possible for one person to give an objective assessment of quality, why do we need an aggregator? Why do we need critics at all now that we have the technology to analyze art from a non-human perspective? Because the whole point of art is the human perspective. It is about what it is to be human. A variety of critics are helpful because they cater to a variety of opinions. They demonstrate a variety of perspectives. There are games that I love that get terrible scores. There are games I hated that got amazing scores. This is subjective taste. Everyone is different. And by focusing on the score, you may miss out on some really amazing experiences. So next time you click on an IGN review or a video or whatever, and you get the urge to skip to the end to get to the number, take a minute to actually consider what you like and listen to the words to figure out if you and the person speaking to you are on the same page. And if you find a critic you like that has a similar taste to you, great, but nothing is one-to-one. There are critics that I love, that I've often disagreed with. That doesn't mean they have a rubbish take, or they've dropped the ball and done a shit review. It also doesn't necessarily mean they're being disingenuous. It just means they felt differently than I do. And that's normal, because everyone is different. There is no objectively good or objectively bad. Thank you again to all my lovely patrons, all the people you see here on screen. Special thanks to Spencer Moss, Bender, Wastoid, and a very special thanks to Lako. If you want to get your name in the credits of my videos or said with my mouth, you can. Go subscribe to the Patreon. It really helps me out. I do all of this stuff myself in my spare time, so anything you contribute goes directly into time or resources to make more of this stuff. I put extra content on there, so if you like to hear me talk, you'll get more of that over there. I'll be dropping a live commentary of the recent Silent Hill 2 video real soon, so keep your eyes peeled for that. If you have made it to the end of the video, I really appreciate you hearing me out. If you did dig the video, maybe consider doing all the YouTube things, do a like and or a subscribe. Please, I have an AI wife and AI kids to consider. Do it for them, if not for me. Thank you again, and please, please, have a great day.